In the 17th century, what were the notable strands that were conveyed that helped in the future eras? Two amazing writers will also be named.
In the 18th century, comprehensive historical highlights were created. The question is, who were the writers that made these?
In the 19th and 20th century, what was the second largest Wordsworth collection in the world, and who were the ones that document the Romantic movement in detail?
In the Old English, the Anglo-Saxon epic poem will be shown.
In the Middle Ages, what is the importance of the Code of Chivalry? One famous author will be revealed in this age.
What famous poem and tale in the late Middle Ages do you know? We will find out soon.
These are numerous Renaissance famous contributions in the English Renaissance period. What are these contributions?
There are many remarkable authors in the Restoration period, but who are they all, and why are they considered remarkable?
In the Realism, we will see the importance of visual art in the 20th century. How important they thought.
What was the larger New Negro movement in the Harlem Renaissance, and what happened from parallel to modernism?
In the Edwardian period, what is the Golden Age?
Who was T.S. Eliot in the modern period, and why was he a leader of the modernist movement?
What was the Slaughterhouse Five? Anti-war in the post-modern period. What is its impact?
Who are the known Puritan authors and Puritan masterpieces? What were the prominent literary genres in their time?
In the Age of Reason, what was the adaptation of the pseudonym of Poor Richard?
What were the masterpieces, novels, and who were the famous authors in the moderns?
In the Neoclassical period, who was Alexander Pope?
In the Romantic period, why was Victor Hugo the most important in all French Romantic writers?
Who was Thomas Hardy in the Victorian period? A Victorian realist will also be revealed in this period.
Who was Frederick Douglass of the realistic American period?
What was relativism in the postmodernism? And what was the concentration of ideology in this period?
What was the devotion in the American Renaissance period? Why was democracy its primary focus? Good day, world! We are your anchors for today. My name is Kenneth Malyari.
I'm April Sarmiento, live at Anglo-American Literature News. The division of rare of manuscript collection has considerable holding in Anglo-American literature from 17th century onwards. With notable strengths in the 18th century, Romanticism, and the Victorian and modern periods. Among the 17th century holding is a complete set of the Shakespeare folios and works by John Milton and his contemporaries.
18th century highlights include near comprehensive printed collections of Jonathan Swift and Alexander Pope, and substantial holdings on John Dryden, Samuel Johnson, Joseph Addison, Sir Richard Steele, William Cowper, Fanny Burney, and others. Related materials include complete runs of periodicals such as The Spectator and The Tatler.
The literature of 19th and early 20th centuries. The Cornell Wordsworth Collection, the second largest Wordsworth collection in the world, documents the Romantic movement in detail.
All the major standard authors of the Victorian and modern periods, such as Charles Dickens, George Eliot, T.S. Eliot, W.B. Yeats, Joseph Conrad, James Joyce, Virginia Woolf, and many more are well represented.
Old English 450 to 1066 years by Joseph Cecil.
Old English. The Anglo-Saxon epic poem The Wolf is the oldest surviving Anglo-Saxon poetry. Leo means bright or noble, and wolf means wolf. Therefore, the wolf means bright or noble wolf in Anglo-Saxon. It was written in England sometime between 8th and early 11th century. The author was anonymous Anglo-Saxon poet. Back to the studio.
Middle Ages and Medieval Times in High and Late Middle Ages, 1066 and 1500 years by Joshua Umar.
Middle Ages or medieval times. The code of chivalry was the knight's honor code. The oath was taken by each of King Arthur's knights, and it featured lofty values like defending the weak and helpless, respecting those in power, and always speaking the truth, as well as bravery, civility, honor, and great gallantry toward ladies. Retained the Troy, Walter von der Vogelweide, Marie de France, and Thomas Aquinas are famous writers in the High Middle Ages. Other notable works in the Late Middle Ages are Divine Comedy by Dante Alighieri and Canterbury by Geoffrey Chaucer.
And now here's Miss Rochelle Abby Tolentino for the English Renaissance.
Utopia by Thomas More and Of Studies by Francis Bacon are the well-known writings in English Renaissance period. Christopher Marlowe, also known as Kit Marlowe, was an English playwright, poet, and translator of the Elizabethan era. William Shakespeare was an English playwright, poet, and actor, widely regarded as the greatest writer in the English language and the world's greatest dramatist.
The Restoration period in 17th century. Back to you, Cecil.
The Restoration period. John Milton's Paradise Lost is largely recognized as the greatest epic poem ever written in English, although he only composed two major original satires, Mac Flecknoe 1682 and The Medal 1685. Dryden the poet is better recognized today as satirist. John Donne's Absalom and Achitophel 1681, his most renowned poem, features several superb satiristic portraits. Donne is often regarded as the English language greatest love poet. Back to the studio.
And now here's Mr. Joshua Tamayo for the Neoclassical period.
Neoclassical period. Alexander Pope was an English poet and satirist of the Augustan period and one of the greatest artistic exponents. Considered the foremost English poet of the early 18th century and the master heroic couplet, he is best known for satirical and discursive poetry, including the Raid of the Lock, the Dunciad, and Essay on Criticism. And for his translation of Homer after Shakespeare, he is the second most quoted author in the Oxford Dictionary of Quotations. Some of his verses have entered common parlance, example damning the faint praise, or to our is human, to forgive divine.
Romantic period, England, 1785 to 1830s, and America, 1800 and 1860 years, by Rochelle Tolentino.
Victor Hugo, in full Victor Marie Hugo, was a poet, novelist, and dramatist who was the most important of the French Romantic writers. Though regarded in France as one of the country's greatest poets, he is better known abroad for such novels as Notre Dame de Paris and Les Miserables. The defense of freedom and the cult of an idealized Napoleon in such poems as the Ode à la Colonne and Louis brought Hugo into touch with a liberal group of writers on the newspaper Le Globe, and his move toward liberalism was strengthened by the French King Charles X's restrictions on the liberty of the press, as well as by the censors prohibiting the stage performance of his play Marion Delorme, which portrays the character of Louis XIII unfavorably. Hugo immediately retorted with Hernani, the first performance of which on February 25, 1830, gained victory for the young romantics over the classicists in what came to be known as the Battle of Hernani. In this play, Hugo extolled the romantic hero in the form of a noble outlaw at war with society, dedicated to passionate love and driven on by inexorable fate. The actual impact of the play owed less to the plot than to the sound and beat of the verse, which was softened only in the elegiac passages spoken by Hernani and Donia.
Victorian period, England, 1832 to 1901. Cecil, back to you.
Victorian period. Thomas Hardy O.M. was an English novelist and poet, a Victorian realist in the tradition of George Eliot. He was influenced both in his novel and his poetry by Romanticism, including the poetry of William Wordsworth. He was highly critical of much in Victorian society, especially on the declining status of rural people in Britain, such as those from his native southwest England. While Hardy wrote poetry throughout his life and regarded himself primarily as a poet, his first collection was not published until 1898. Initially, he gained fame as the author of novels such as Far From Madding Crowd, 1874, The Mayor of Casterbridge, 1886, Tess D'Urbervilles, 1891, and Jude Obscure, 1895. During his lifetime, Hardy poetry was acclaimed by younger poetry, particularly Georgians, who viewed him as mentor. After his death, his poems were launched by Ezra Pound, W.H. Auden, and Philip Larkin. Back to the studio.
And now the realistic America will be reported by Mr. Joshua Tamayo.
Realistic America period. Frederick Douglass was an American social reformer, abolitionist, orator, writer, and statesman after escaping from slavery in Maryland. He became a national leader of the abolitionist movement in Massachusetts and New York, becoming famous for his oratory and incisive anti-slavery writings. Accordingly, he was described by abolitionists in his time as a living counterexample to slaveholders' argument that slaves lacked the intellectual capacity to function as independent American citizens. Likewise, Northerners at the time found it hard to believe that such as a great orator had once been a slave.
And now the Edwardian period will be reported by Miss Rochelle Avi Tolentino.
David Herbert Lawrence was an English writer and poet and was acknowledged as one of the most influential writers in 20th century. His works mostly talks about issues such as sexuality, emotional health, vitality, spontaneity, and instinct. One of his notable works is the novel Sons and Lovers, which is about a son that is very much attached to his mother, which made him unable to connect to others emotionally and form a long-lasting relationships. Another author is Arthur Conan Doyle, a Scottish writer which has written more than 300 fictions, and one of these is the famous series titled The Adventures of Sherlock Holmes. Every Sherlock Holmes story is centered in mystery. After he realized his success, he quitted his job as a physician and just devoted himself to writing. Other important authors in this period are Joseph Conrad, Rudyard Kipling, Edward Morgan.
Modern period, 1914 to 1945. Cecil, back to you.
Modern period. Thomas Trent Eliot, better known as T.S. Eliot, is a poet, playwright, and publisher that was awarded both Nobel Prize in Literature and Order of Merit. In the year 1948, his most famous poem was the love song of J. Alfred Prufrock, which tackles a man's indecisiveness and conflict within himself. Ernest Miller Hemingway was an American novelist and journalist who is best known for his book titled The Old Man and the Sea, which made him Pulitzer Prize. He was also awarded of the Nobel Prize for Literature in 1954. The Old Man and the Sea is a novella that talks about how beautiful but cruel nature is. The sea as the nature itself, which gives but also takes lives away, and the old man symbolizes a human. Other prominent writers in this period are Ezra Pound and Wallace Stevens in poetry, Virginia Woolf, William Flower, and James Joyce in novel. Back to the studio.
Now the postmodern period will be presented by Mr. Joshua Tamayo.
Postmodern period. Kurt Vonnegut was an American writer. He converses about pacifism and social equality in his works. One of his notable published was the Slaughterhouse-Five, which is a science fiction that explores the effects of war inflicted on a person, both physical and psychological. Thomas Lincoln is an American novelist and short story writer. He is noted for his works that are both fantasy and black humor. He is best known for his novel Gravity's Rainbow that earned him the National Book Award. This novel dives into matters like social science, profanity, and literary propriety. Other well-known writers in the period are Richard Grutigan, Don DeLillo, William Gaddis, Vladimir Nabokov, Peter Ackroyd, Thomas Berger, Angela Carter, Salman Rushdie, and Umberto Eco. Back to the studio.
And now the Puritan and Colonial will be presented by Miss Nilo Jean Sevilla.
Puritan or Colonial, 1650 to 1750. Masterpieces of Puritan. A narrative of the captivity and restoration. Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God. Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God is a sermon written by British colonial Christian theologian Jonathan Edwards, preached to his own congregation in Northampton, Massachusetts to unknown effect, and again on July 8, 1741 in Enfield, Connecticut. A narrative of the captivity and restoration is the work in the literary genre of captivity narratives. It is considered to be one of America's first bestsellers, 4 editions appearing in 1682 when it was first published. Some of the masterpieces are sermons, diaries, personal narratives, and written in plain style. Authors Mary Rowlandson and Edward Taylor. Back to the studio.
And now the moderns shall be reported by Miss Darcy Jimenez.
The next one are the moderns, from year 1900 to 1950. Masterpieces are The Great Gatsby, Poetry of Jeffers, Williams, Cummings, Frost, Eliot, Sandberg, Pound, Robinson, and Stevens. Most of the masterpieces are novels, plays, poetry, and use of interior monologue and stream of consciousness. Authors are F. Scott Fitzgerald, Ezra Pound, T.S. Eliot, and Karel Capek. And now I will tell you all about the Revolutionary or Age of Reason years 1750 to 1800s. Masterpiece is Poor Richard's Almanac. Poor Richard's Almanac was a yearly almanac published by Benjamin Franklin, who adopted the pseudonym of Poor Richard or Richard Saunders. For this purpose, the publication appeared continually from 1732 to 1758. It was a bestseller pamphlet published in the American colonies. Print runs reached 10,000 per year. Author is Benjamin Franklin. And lastly, the Harlem Renaissance, from year 1918 to 1937. This embraces the literary, musical, and visual arts, also known as the most influential movement in the African-American literary history. Harlem Renaissance fought for the Negroes, apart from the influence of the white stereotypes, with their literature and culture, so that the Harlem district of New York City served to be the symbol of capital of this cultural awakening. Back to the studio.
And now the postmodernism will be reported by Miss Nilo Jean Sevilla.
Postmodernism is a comprehensive term that encompasses a social-cultural and literary theory, as well as a change in viewpoint that has appeared in a range of fields. Postmodernism is linked to the post-World War II era's power changes in dehumanization, as well as the assault of consumer capitalism. Pastiche, or the copying of another style, was used by both of these schools. Modernist and postmodernist works are frequently fractured, making it difficult to express a clear message. Both modernism and postmodernism give expression to the 20th century Western world's fears, confusion, and disintegration. Realism, 1855 to 1900s. This was a style in art, music, and literature. This movement began in literature in the mid-19th century and became an important tendency in the early 20th century in visual art. Realism is a realistic concept that depicts the everyday life of an ordinary people. Back to the studio.
Romanticism, 1800 years to 1860 by Rodel Argumedo.
Romanticism, 1800 to 1860. This movement built rationalism and scientific thought from the Enlightenment and kept it from being constrained. Romanticism believes in emotion that logic and facts with realism. They both emphasize human fallibility. The genre of Romanticism in art, literature, and music influenced the political arts in America between 1830s to 1865. American Renaissance, 1830 to 1865. The devotion of all five Mathesians related to the prospect of democracy was the thematic focus of American Renaissance according to Matheson. He referred to the American Renaissance writing as literature for our democracy and urged the country to reclaim them.